In this lecture, we are going to provide a brief introduction to privacy impact assessments. We will start by defining what a privacy impact assessment, or PIA, is. We will then discuss why conduct a PIA, when to do a PIA, and we will look at example PIA triggers. We will then look at the different specifics by which PIAs vary, and we will conclude by looking at different varieties of PIAs. So what is a privacy impact assessment? A privacy impact assessment, or a PIA, is a tool to identify, assess, and mitigate privacy risk associated with a project, product, or service. Now, why did I add process to this, a tool and process? I added process because a PIA is not a one and done activity. It is an iterative process between the system owner and/or managers and data owners with the privacy office. It's also important to note that a PIA is not conducted just for IT systems. You would also conduct them with any project that is collecting, processing, disseminating, storing, etc., personally identifiable information or personal data. So why do we want to conduct a PIA? Well, as we just said, we use PIAs to identify, assess, and mitigate risk. They are also required by numerous laws, regulations, and industry standards. Conducting a PIA also helps us to implement privacy by design principles. And in implementing those PBD principles, a PIA is a proactive approach to privacy rather than a reactive afterthought. So remember that one of the PBD principles is proactive. By getting involved early in the software development or procurement process, privacy professionals are able to implement controls to help identify and mitigate risk. When should we do a PIA? Well, as we also just mentioned, during the planning stage of a new project or system. Of course, we want to do it when laws, regulations, and standards are implemented and updated. Of course, we want to do it when laws, regulations, and standards require. In some cases, and this may be the case when you're operating in jurisdictions that currently do not have a comprehensive privacy law, for example, you may start doing them once those laws, regulations, or standards are implemented or updated. We will also conduct a PIA when privacy risk is created. For example, there is a substantial change to an existing system. And so it may be that there is an IT system that, at least at its incipiency, was not collecting personal data, but after some time, the system owners or data owners decided it would be a good idea to do so. Well, in that case, because there's been a change to the system, and that change has introduced a privacy risk, then in that case, with the introduction of the privacy risk, we would do a PIA to identify and mitigate that risk. At the outset here, I want to be clear on what a trigger is. A trigger is an event that requires that a PIA be conducted. And example triggers include collection of personal data from new or existing sources or processes, if records are being digitized, when data is being aggregated, if there is use of user authentication technology, and when there's use of third-party services or tools. Again, if we're using a third-party service or tool to process data that we have collected, then our organization is ultimately responsible for that data, and therefore we want to make sure that any third-party tools are adequately protecting that data. The flavor of PIA that you end up using is going to vary by jurisdiction, industry, and data. And so, as we'll see later in this series on privacy assessments, the type of assessment done in the United States is a little bit different than the type done in the European Union under the GDPR. And so in the United States, if we're looking at the federal government, for example, we're going to be conducting a privacy impact assessment, or PIA, whereas under the GDPR in the European Union, we're going to be conducting a data protection impact assessment. There are also differences across different sectors. The type of impact assessment you do in the healthcare space versus the financial space are all going to be a little different. And those industry differences have a lot to do with the type of data that's being collected. Again, protected health information versus financial information versus educational records. Finally, there are many varieties of PIAs. We discussed just a moment ago the difference between a PIA and DPIA. And when we look throughout the world at many different jurisdictions, we see that these impact assessments have different titles. A transfer impact assessment, for example, is used when data is transferred outside of the EU under the GDPR. There is also what is referred to in Brazil under the LGPD as an impact report. I will not try and pronounce the Portuguese here. I have it there, but I've translated it as impact report. In the People's Republic of China, under China's Personal Information Security Specification, the title of their impact assessment is Personal Information Security Impact Assessment System. Under Virginia's Consumer Data Protection Act, you will conduct what is called a data protection assessment. And a quick note that statute, the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, sometimes that abbreviation includes a V, sometimes it does not. And two other types of impact assessments that you might see out in the wild are Express PIA and Privacy Threshold Analysis. Now, to be honest with you, I've never seen Express PIA before. I think that's something that might be unique to the IAPP, but hey, if I'm wrong, please jump in the Discord server and educate me. As for a Privacy Threshold Analysis, or a PTA, these are typically conducted for every system, regardless of whether or not that system collects PII. And it's done really just as a compliance check to make sure that the Privacy Office is aware of the existence of this system, and that the system manager or data owner has attested to the fact that their system does not collect PII. In this lecture, we went over what a Privacy Impact Assessment, or PIA, is. A PIA is a tool or process used to identify, assess, and mitigate privacy risk associated with a project, product, or service. Again, we conduct PIAs to identify, assess, and mitigate risk, to comply with laws, regulations, standards, and policies, and implement privacy by design. We conduct PIAs during the planning stage of a new project or system, when laws or regulations are updated, or when new privacy risk is created. PIA triggers include collection of personal data from new or existing sources or processes, the digitization of records, data aggregation, user authentication technology, and use of third-party services and tools. PIA specifics will vary by jurisdiction, industry, and data used. And there are a number of varieties of PIAs. I won't read through the list again here. Of course, you can hit pause and review as necessary.